Mikuláš Černák became the most feared person of the wild 1990s. In the small village of Terrorized, where everyone knew each other well, no one would have thought that the former bus driver would soon become entangled in organized crime. The Mafia boss is currently serving a life sentence with the possibility of parole, which he applied for in 2023. Money and power are intoxicating, and people do the worst things for them. Take a look with us. Beneath the surface of the most brutal gangster crimes committed by Mikuláš Černák, who was sentenced to life in prison and claimed that his sentence was more effective than cancer itself. The beginnings of the Černák gang. The Černák gang began to take shape in 1992. The decisive moment was the meeting with Miloš Kashtán, because he had a knack for business and gained contacts with politicians, lawyers, and other influential people. The core of the Mafia gang was completed by Jan Khan, whom Černák helped out of trouble at that time. The core of the group consisted of another 20 people who committed various types of criminal activity. At first, they extorted and intimidated businessmen, forcing them to use their civilian security service, Security 3. They used it to legalize racketeering and employed their foot soldiers to gain control over businesses. They earned millions of crowns through contract killings, which they divided according to their rank within the group. At the top was always Mikuláš Černák. The other members were extremely afraid of him and respected him greatly. He managed to build connections with all the major criminal organizations, which protected the men who a few years later would put him behind bars. The group often visited the Gerlach Hotel. At that time, it was owned by Milan Reichel, the former boss of the Poprad underworld, and a good friend of Černák. They had control over the whole of Slovakia, where they pursued their interests with a level of brutality previously unseen. Most of those who, during the 1990s, got involved with the then untouchable boss Mikuláš Černák ended up buried in the mountains. The murders were meticulously planned and carried out in a way that minimized any traces. Only those who directly participated in the executions knew how the bodies were disposed of. The boss from Banská Bystrica was arrested in 1997. While serving his sentence, he confessed to 16 murders, but former underworld figures claimed there were more than 20. The bloody list of Mikuláš Černák's murders. According to his own words, Černák got involved in his first murder by accident. The elimination of Ladislav Bojkun took place back in 1992 because of his alleged affair with the wife of Mafia hitman Aleš Hazi. Hazi was supposed to have shot him, and together with Černák, they buried the body. A series of brutal crimes was set in motion by the first contract killing in 1993 in his hometown of Terrorized. The real list therefore begins with the murder of pub owner Miroslav Vilcek, who testified against Černák's brother Vladimir after witnessing him beat one of the guests to death. This is considered the first execution in which Černák was involved. Even though he was not the direct perpetrator, Miroslav Vilcek was killed by Aleš Hazi, who later boasted that he had blown his brains out with a rifle right onto his stomach. To this day, the whereabouts of his body remain unknown. The murder of the Ukrainian Jaroslav Ivanovich Oros. Based on a plea bargain, Černák confessed to the murder of the Ukrainian mobster Jaroslav Ivanovich Oros, who at that time was living in Banská Bystrica. The murder was arranged by Miloš Kashtán, who was also charged. Oros died after a local alcohol businessman, Ivan Lashut, hired the Černák group to intimidate people who were extorting him. Černák describes this job in the book Slovak Mafia as follows. The first crime for which we also received a financial reward was the removal of the head of the Ukrainian mafia operating in Slovakia, Jaroslav Ivanovich Oros, whom we eliminated right at the beginning, when he and his group tried to intimidate and extort businessmen in Banská Bystrica and its surroundings. They lured the Ukrainian to a meeting, knocked him to the ground, and tied up, drove him to the forest near Polomka. Kashtán, together with other men, dug a grave, and Černák's man Labos shot Oros in the head. What is hidden in the forest above Čierny Balog? Mikuláš Černák led the police officers into the forest above Čierny Balog, where, among others, a former miner also found his grave, and ticket collector Igor Mihalik when the mafia boss shot him in the head. According to Černák, the elimination of Igor Mihalik was ordered by the Prievidza millionaire Rudolf Bielik, with whom the victim got into a dispute in a local bar. Coincidentally, he also ended up dead later. The brothers from Upper Nitra, Robert and Rudolf Bielik, were dealing in diesel and heating oils with excessive VAT deductions. Tens of millions of crowns attracted the Černák gang, who lured Rudolf Bielik to a cottage near Černý Balog and killed him at the same place as Igor Mihalik. A year later, it was the other brother's turn, Robert Bielik. In order for Černák to spare his life, the businessman offered him money. In the end, however, they strangled him with a cable and shot him in a garden cottage in Bratislava's Nové Mesto district. The execution of the Bielik brothers was allegedly ordered by their own bodyguards from Černák and Kaštan because they too were after their money. Police informant Joseph Filip. According to media reports, Černák believed that Joseph Filip was a police informant. Therefore, as a warning to others, on the 22nd of September 1994, he shot him in the head in front of Milan Reichel. Since it was his birthday at the time, after the shooting, Černák shook his hand and said, "Happy birthday." Joseph Filip was murdered in the forest near Liptovská Teplička, right above his own grave. Surprisingly, Černák confessed to this act at the court in Prešov. The brutal murder of the brothers from Banská Bystrica. Bodybuilders Peter and Pavel Grolmus brothers owned a gym in Banská Bystrica, but they had disagreements with their business partner. They were supposed to resolve their financial dispute on May 22, 1996, in the locker rooms where a Mafia boss and his group were waiting for them. Since then, no one has seen the Grolmus brothers. Mikuláš Černák confessed to their murder that very day to Milan Reichel, who personally knew the brothers. According to the words of the boss from Poprad, Černák told him, "They're lying in the locker room or in the showers, and their hands are like little frogs lying there." Investigators found the bodies of the Grolmus brothers only after several years. The gym in the Sasova housing estate in Banská Bystrica operated for a similarly long time. Černák did not commit this act alone either. The murder of the tiger trader. In 2015, police dug up the remains of Vladimír Šuhajda above the village of Jaraba, after Mikuláš Černák confessed to his murder following years in custody. Šuhajda brought Černák a tiger worth 120,000 Slovak crowns and later, together with the Melovec brothers, left for Banská Bystrica on his orders. When Šuhajda came to collect the money, Černák's men took him to boss's brothel, where they got him drunk and drove him to Čertovice. There they stripped him of his clothes and executed him with 2 shots to the head. According to witnesses, Černák declared that a sentence passed by him was more effective than cancer. He confessed to Reichel about 20 to 25 murders. When asked if he was afraid that someone might testify against him, he replied, "What should I be afraid of? I'll get 25 years, the witness will get 20. A man who did not beg for his life. The murder of Pavel Lenhardt was overshadowed by conflicts in the underworld, especially disputes over power and control of illegal activities. And also because he was seen as competition in criminal circles. Černák, together with other accomplices, lured Lenhardt to Banská Bystrica, to a place where the security company Security 3 was based. There, in an office, he was knocked to the ground. They held down his limbs and shot him twice in the head. Since Lenhardt knew that Černák used to bury his victims, he himself asked him not to do so in his case. They loaded the body into a car and drove it to the area of the village Budiš. The police on the 11th of February 1997 found him lying in the trunk of a car. The murder of Peter Novotný, Julius Todt, and Peter Musk. In the plea agreement, Černák further clarified the elimination of the Tiger of Partizánske, Peter Novotný, whose murder was ordered by the Melo brothers because they were afraid he would kill them. After Novotný, another murder followed. Julius Todt and Peter Musk from southeastern Slovakia. Tiger, as he was nicknamed, was the boss of the Upper Nitra underworld and the first in the region to keep tigers. According to Novotný's son, Černák was a family friend. Karol Melo also used to visit him. When relations deteriorated, they decided to eliminate Novotný. Černák called him to lure him to the Lux Hotel in Banská Bystrica. Miloš Kaštan, who was waiting outside, informed Novotný that he wasn't at the hotel but at his own erotic salon. He never made it to the place. Černák's men killed Peter Novotný on the access road to the hotel. 3 men shot him with submachine guns from a red Volkswagen with Austrian license plates. The brutal murder of Gustav Slivensky. According to the police, Mikuláš Černák, together with his accomplices, brutally murdered police officer Gustav Slivenský, who was probably looking for the shooter targeting the Mafia boss. Černák also suspected that Slivenský was informing his colleagues. The murder took place in the Gerlach Hotel in Poprad, which at that time was owned by Milan Rajčel. Together with Černák, Slivenský and 2 other people, they were sitting in the hotel bar. After their conversation, everyone except Rajčel went to the waiters' changing rooms, which were located behind the gaming room. When Milan Rajčel later joined them, Slivenský was already lying on the ground, and 2 accomplices were cutting his head off. When asked if they were crazy to do something like that in his hotel, Černák replied that there was no other way. They placed Gustav Slivenský's severed head in the sink and wrapped the body in a bedsheet that had the Gerlach Hotel stamp on it. They took the body and set it on fire on Mount Roni, by the road to Vernar, but the sheet did not burn completely. Since the hotel stamp remained almost intact, suspicion for the murder fell on Milan Rajčel. Černák reportedly stabbed Slivenský several times with a knife, and his accomplices cut off his head while he was still alive. After the murder, they displayed it along with a police cap on the hood of Slivenský's car, which was parked in the middle of a housing estate in Poprad. A random passerby found him lying on a red Lada car in front of the building where he lived. The Tatra Vagonka case, the murder of Vladimír Bakleda. In Slovakia, Černák was the main authority in the underworld even outside of Banská Bystrica. He spent time at the seaside and was involved in several murders with the Dunajská Streda mobster Tibor Papajč. He is also connected to the highest boss of the Sikorovci gang, Robert Lališ. It was with him that Peter Steinhubel, also known as Jalud, ordered the murder of the Poprad official Vladimír Bakleda. He was eyeing Bakleda's share in Tatra Vagonka, which Bakleda apparently hadn't acquired in a clean way either. Vladimír Bakleda was first kidnapped and held in a guest house in Bystrica, where Černák used to keep tigers. The Poprad official was drugged with medication, and in the presence of a notary, he was forced to transfer his share in Tatra Vagonka to Peter Steinhubel. According to testimony, Bakleda was in such poor health that they had to dope him with rohypnol and alcohol. After he signed, they took him to the forest at Tale, where Černák, just to be sure, shot him in the head in front of a pit. Even though Bakleda already looked dead before that. Steinhubel was supposed to pay 20 million Slovak crowns for this murder. However, several people were interested in the money. 5 powerful underworld figures were charged with the murder of Vladimír Bakleda. In reality, though, only one of them is actually behind bars. After a few months, the prosecutor dropped the charges against the 4 defendants, and the money went beyond Robert Lališ. A heinous revenge for Michalci. Mai. According to eyewitness accounts, Mikuláš Černák came to Dunajská Streda and picked up the police tapes. To see with his own eyes the execution of Michalci, Miho, who was one of his men. The murder of Rudolf Hodosi was an act of revenge and caused a great stir in southern Slovakia. After the police interrogation of the suspected murderer Michalci, Miho, Vladimír Černák also waited for Hodosi. 2 fake policemen took him to a family house on Devinská road in Bratislava. When Černák asked him about Miho's murder, he allegedly denied it the whole time. The boss from Banská Bystrica was supposed to ask him about it. So how do you want to die? With a shot to the heart, Hodosi replied. A long knife pierced his chest in an instant. Černák was then supposed to stand behind him. With the handle of the knife, he struck the top of his head and separated it from the body with deep cuts. Hodosi's washed and combed head was returned to Dunajská Streda, where it was placed in a concrete flower pot in front of the Modrý Dunaj department store. The headless body was thrown, wrapped in a carpet, on the riverbank, still in Devin. Michalci. He was one of Mikuláš Černák's most loyal men after he murdered the treasurer of the Papajovci gang. Miško Magyar, as he called himself, was present at the murder of police officer Gustav Slivenský, whose head he cut off at the Gerlach Hotel. He was shot dead with a submachine gun in Dunajská Streda in 1977. The execution of the Pole Grzegorz Szymanek. Protected witness Alexander Horvat, also a former member of the underworld known as Shani, testified against Černák, who, according to him, shot the Pole Grzegorz Szymanek. In doing so, he broke the code of silence, the fundamental principle of mafia groups. Out of fear for his life, Horvat changed his testimony several times. After Černak's men offered him money, he recanted his statements and declared the Mafia boss innocent. It was well known that Černák also cooperated with criminal groups outside Slovakia. In the autumn of 1977, Černak's men kidnapped one of the richest Polish fraudsters, Gregor Szymanek. Originally, they hoped for a large ransom. In the end, for unknown reasons, the money never materialized. The Pole was detained in a mountain cabin near Banska Bystrica in select company. In addition to Černák, the murder was attended by the boss of the Košice underworld, Robert Holub, along with two of his associates. According to testimony, Černák pulled out a gun and with the words, "We'll see each other in hell," he was supposed to shoot Szymanek in the open mouth. The second shot to the heart was allegedly fired by Jan Khan, who however denies Černák's version of events. Gregor Szymanek, a pioneer of tax and customs megafrauds, enjoyed his millions abroad for years. His murder was ordered from the Černák group by Polish mobsters. The murder of the Košice boss Robert Holub. Černák's strong position in the Slovak underworld allowed him to earn respect on all fronts, including the East. He maintained close relations with Robert Holub, but when those ties became strained, he resolved them with violence. At the beginning of July 1977, the elites of the then Eastern Slovak underworld attended the grand christening celebration of Karol Kolárik's son. The godfather Mikuláš Černák was also present, as was Robert Holub, who 3 months later, on the 24th of September 1977, was lured to the Danube Hotel in Bratislava, where a shooting broke out. Unlike the bodyguard Stefan Fabian, the then boss of the Košice underworld survived the shootout. The contract killer from the Cikor gang, Jozef Rohač, shot the severely wounded Holub a few days later in the hospital at Kramare, firing from the opposite rooftop at night. Out of 24 shots, he hit him in the head 4 times. Černák then appointed Karol Kolárik as the new boss of Košice, who also did not survive the Mafia rampage due to suspicions that he was cooperating with the police. Holub had previously escaped death as well. The first attempt to eliminate Robert Holub took place on the 22nd, on September 22nd, 1997, when at the KVP gas station in Košice, the masked shooter on a motorcycle had his gun jammed. There were said to be several reasons for his elimination. According to the testimony of Mikuláš Černák, the then boss of the Košice underworld had unreasonable demands on Jan Dopiriak, who was privatizing the Prešov meat processing plant. Černák also wanted to replace him with Karol Kolárik, whom Holub was planning to eliminate. Just like Mikuláš Černák, after he was approached for cooperation by SIS Deputy Director Jaroslav Sviečota. For the murder of his friend Holub, Imrik Olač, who was wanted by the police in connection with the murder of Robert Remiáš, tried to kill Černák. However, he ended up on his death list. Also on it are the Mafia brothers Daniš, who died in a car explosion, Milan Piliar, who was killed in revenge for stabbing Martin Laboš, Ladislav Šuhajda, the murder of Tibor Kohulak, and other cases whose investigations are still ongoing. Attempts to eliminate Mikuláš Černák. Even the feared boss from Banska Bystrica became inconvenient, and orders for his elimination were coming from the very highest places. SIS Deputy Jaroslav Sviečota, together with the Košice boss Robert Holub, visited the parents of Milan Rajčel, who was hiding from the police at the time, and offered him immunity in exchange for the murder of Mikuláš Černák. To this, Rajčel's mother told Holub that her son would never agree to something like that. Both men, Jaroslav Sviečota and Robert Holub, are now dead. The murder of witness Marian Karcel. In June 2000, an unknown perpetrator fatally wounded the witness, who was supposed to testify in the trial against Mikuláš Černák, with several shots from a submachine gun. Marian Karcel was killed in Banska Bystrica, in the Kinchelova district, in a car in front of his house, allegedly on Černák's orders, who at that time was serving his sentence. Unlike the other witnesses, however, he never changed his testimony against Černák. Apart from the person who ordered the murder and other individuals, Karcel's former lawyer, Daniel Mauch, is also accused of his murder. He faces charges that he helped his client eliminate a witness. Mauch allegedly organized the murder together with other accused individuals, for which the perpetrator was paid a reward of 1 million crowns. Voluntarily at the police station. When the Žilina police launched a large-scale search operation for the Mafia trio at the end of 1997, Mikuláš Černák, together with Jan Kan, voluntarily turned themselves into the police. Before his planned arrival at the regional police headquarters, Černák called TV Markiza and other media, who were probably supposed to cover him from possible shooters. At that time, he already knew that as soon as he surfaced, he would no longer be protected. Later, Černák wrote a statement to Markiza saying that he had been promised from the highest places that after the interrogation, he and Jan Khan would be released. However, various high-ranking individuals, including police officers, had their eyes on the commissions. Černák did not expect that after the extortion charges, other serious criminal activities would come to light. Together with Khan, his complaint regarding the charges and their detention was rejected. Investigator Josef Kovacic remembers Černák as a normal person who did not resist cooperating. Unlike his accomplices, he understood the consequences his actions could have. However, when he was released in 2002, it seemed he quickly forgot this caution. While skiing at Štrbské Pleso, he selfishly pushed his way through the crowd, which did not go unnoticed. The situation outraged the then Prime Minister Mikuláš Černák, who witnessed everything firsthand and filed a criminal complaint against Černák, who was already under prosecution. Later, Černák was detained again and placed in custody. The long-awaited trial of Mikuláš Černák took place in November 2008. The Mafia boss, before the verdict was announced, requested to be released, which the Senate immediately denied. At the end, statements from the preliminary proceedings were read, in which he would admit something and then immediately deny it, just to point the finger at those who had cooperated with him and were now testifying against him. Mikuláš Černák heard the verdict a year later at the district court in Prešov. Even though he was charged with 7 murders and 6 counts of participation in murder, he denied everything. Moreover, in court, Miloš Kaštan, who together with Jan Khan was at the origin of the Černák gang, offered Vasil Imriško, Černák's friend, a financial reward for testifying against him. Mikuláš Černák unexpectedly breaks his silence. After the highest sentence was proposed for Černák, the former Mafia boss offered to confess to additional murders in exchange for a shorter sentence. He was unsuccessful, and the panel of the district court in Prešov decided on an exceptional punishment of life imprisonment. However, at the beginning of 2015, Mikuláš Černák suddenly breaks his long silence. He decides to cooperate with the police and declares that he will help solve more than 30 murders. I told myself, enough is enough. I will speak out, break the silence, and start talking as well. After previous trials during which he denied most of what he was accused of, he confessed to founding an organized group, which committed violent crimes including kidnappings and murders. Today I have a critical attitude toward my dark past from that period, and I am ashamed of it because of the acts I committed. I believe the time has come for me to repay my debt to society in this way as well. According to experts, Černák broke his silence out of anger toward those who committed crimes with him and are now cooperating with the police to redeem themselves from their own crimes. He also knows very well that a life sentence does not mean, according to Slovak law, that he will spend his entire life in prison. After 25 years, he applied for conditional release. His friends got him behind bars and enjoyed the money of a man they once crawled before in fear while they were free. They use his money to pay off police officers, prosecutors, and everyone else around. Just so he doesn't get out of prison, said Vasil Imrišek. The fall of Mikuláš Černák came very quickly after his 31st birthday celebration. On that occasion, all those who had survived his rise to power came to pay their respects. At that time, elections were approaching in Slovakia, and the authorities wanted to score points by taking down a man who seemed untouchable. The arrest of Mikuláš Černák could thus calm a society traumatized by murders and car bombings. When Zuzana Ondruščáková, a reporter from Markiza TV, asked him whether it was true that he had police officers, prosecutors, judges, and high-ranking SIS members on his payroll, he replied, "Yes, we did. And the reasons for them were simple and self-serving, financial. For us, the reason was so that we could continue our activities and operate." Before the verdict was delivered, he pointed to the accomplices he had worked with, who are now testifying against him in order to secure immunity for themselves. And he delivered his closing statement, "I have said several times that I am ashamed of my dark past. But unfortunately, it can't be undone. And that doesn't mean I don't regret the loss of human life. Also, especially the relatives, children, wives, and parents of the victims who are not to blame for how the victims lived or what they did, and who are the subject of this case. I wasn't born a mafioso either. I became a criminal, but I grew up in a decent family.